My name is Annette Dickerson, and I'm very honored and privileged to be moderating this panel. In keeping with the flow of the day, we began speaking about the experiences of long-termers and aging prisoners inside the system. We then went on to talk about the barriers to release and an analysis of the parole system and other policies and statutes that impede the release of incarcerated people. And so now we're going to focus on returning people, returning aging prisoners who are coming back to the community. We have a wonderful panel here today, and I would like to begin by introducing Tina Maschi. And I do need my glasses, which I'm still trying to get used to. And Tina is an associate professor at the Fordham University Graduate School of Social Service in New York City. You have detailed bios in your programs, and so in the interest of time, I won't spend more time in a longer description. But what Tina is going to do is to give us a framework of and a broader picture of returning prisoners, and so we can then go on from there and have a deeper discussion.
Thank you very much, Annette. When I like to talk about aging people in prison and thinking about the reintegration, the barriers and facilitators to successful reintegration, I like to think about it as co-constructing community. And one of the reasons why I call it that is because when I think about the issue in general, I always go back to the Einstein saying that we cannot use the same level of thinking that created the problem to solve the problem. And as you heard today, we clearly have an issue where we have aging and elderly people in prison that either need our supports or could provide beneficial role modeling for each other and family members and community. And so this talk is called, or 5-minute intro here is called Removing Barriers to Reunited Aging People in Prison with Their Families and Communities, because that's really been lost. We've been focusing on the individual, but not with their connections. And so I wanted to show you here is a diagram that was created by members of the True Grit program, which is a senior structured living program in the Nevada Department of Corrections. And if you can everybody see it? It's a little faint, but it is their drawings. But this is created by the group to document and map what they see as their pathway to accountability, rehabilitation, and preparing for community reintegration. And it starts at the top, in the middle of the story, at the penitentiary, where they are right now. And they draw a map in which they have a decision to make. Do they take responsibility away and participate in this structured living program, or do they responsibility way, or do they take risky lane and go to the general population? And as you see in the diagram, if they take responsibility way, they are provided with a full structured program that fosters holistic well-being and accountability. They have opportunities to participate in empowerment activities, running groups, but also programming that helps maintain their physical, psychological, social, and spiritual well-being in prison. And it's a structured program, so it's documented. However, if they go to the general population, they're at risk of being exposed to a culture if there's a lack of programming in that particular prison. And so that takes them, if you're on responsibility way, do your programming, you go down, they're going down Hope Avenue with the hope that when they get to the parole board, that they will see and that their efforts and they would be rewarded and get sent down release road. Now, there's assumption on their part that these supports that they say will help them succeed and reintegrate, which includes employment and family support, will lead to Success Street, and that's what we're looking for. If they go down this road, down recidivism road, where they might engage in risky behavior, criminal thinking, parole violation, and go back to way back road. Now, although they do it for their own social responsibility to each other, I'm proposing, and as we look at this diagram, that oftentimes we look at prisons as these faraway places separate than us, and they're not. Prisons are our community. We've created these social structures, and they exist in our community. They are not separate. And just because a family member is away, it does not separate them from each other. They are still connected emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually. So if there's a road of accountability, it's a two-way road in which we as citizens have a social responsibility to each other. Just as if we expect people to be responsible if they committed an offense, we also are responsible to create the pathways for success for one another. And so I really thought about this a lot. And so what are we looking to do? One in the narratives of the older people that I've spoken with since they've come out of prison is that they talked about wanting connections, but they also want a balance between autonomy and support. They want supports when they need them, but they also want autonomy. So if we had an ideal world in which we had community, and remember that we all are some part of family or another, we're actually in this central place in which we care for one another, or called, if I could borrow on the metaphors of the roadways, is the unity circle. And it's only a care way that we could exist here if everything goes right, if we have a person and we have them connected with their family, as well as these social networks and these central elements, basic needs. And in reality, the primary services that you only need to be involved in are health and education. We only enter this care way, which is secondary to the primary unity circle, if we need these types of services. If a person has a disability, you might use a service, but if we're professionals, we're supposed to care in a way that we send them back to unity circle, not somehow when there's the cracks and fragmented services, lack of preparedness of the workforce, that increases the risk of people getting into the criminal justice system. Also, issues of power and disparities are sending some people much further out on what people in the studies say the criminal justice system is a system of last resort. And we also need to think about making those fragmented connections. They're not there. Systems are not communicating to each other, and we're creating barriers to families and communities to heal one another. And so we really need to think about how can we co-create, co-construct community so that we can, and I go beyond reunification. If I take a family perspective, I think of it as reunification. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Before I introduce the next speaker, I just feel compelled to say that right now, the United States government is undergoing a review by the UN Human Rights Committee in Geneva. And it's quite apparent that the United States is an outlier when it comes to criminal justice policies. And the most recent examinations have spoken to torture and to solitary confinement and to the criminalization of the homeless. And we do expect, coming down the pike, the more evidence they get, the more there will be international condemnation of the ways in which the United States carries out its criminal justice policies. And so as a human rights defender, I just felt compelled to say that. To follow the vein of community, autonomy, and support, I'd like for Liz Gaynes to talk. Liz has been has led the Osborne Association for 30 years. But in addition to that, is also a partner and a caregiver of a returning prisoner. And so we'd like for Liz to share her experiences. Thank you.
Yeah, and so my professional experience should have made me better prepared for my personal experience, but not. So I'm going to spend sort of try to do a little of both. Although I want to talk about in the community, the prior part of getting out makes a difference. So my children's father, who I actually have been married to for almost 40 years, we were separated, but because of the nature of prison and my concerns about him coming home, wanted to have a legal connection so that I could have some input. And just, I want to say that I'm well aware of the fact that given my relationships in corrections and my job, that in terms of family members being prepared for or knowing how to go about advocating for someone to come home, I am the 1%. So I don't want to make it seem like, to the degree that we have anything together and then you'll find out we have nothing together, what it must be like for people that don't have cars to travel, are not able to get the head of the New York State Parole Board to go and contact the Virginia State Parole Board where he was incarcerated, don't have money for lawyers. So this is sort of as good as it gets, and turns out it's not very good. First of all, prior to he was serving a sentence, his name is Jomo, was serving a sentence that was, they said he'd be in around 12 years and then would probably get out on parole. But Virginia, where he was, abolished parole the year that he was eligible. So even though he was technically eligible, he was turned down 10 more times and did 25 years. Why that matters in part from a family's perspective is every time you go to the parole board, you have to submit a plan. That means you have to have a residence, you have to know where someone's going to go, you have to have a job, you have to have all these things together. And then you have to have that before you go, and then you're turned down, and that plan may not work the next time. So separate from the emotional aspect of it, what we discovered was 10 years later, the plan we had sort of put together and expected to work wasn't going to work anymore. By then, he was 67 years old. He had different kinds of medical challenges. He really was considered to be too old to work, even though at 67, I don't think I'm too old to work. I just want to go on record. And neither are we, right. So the elder panel here believes that we are perfectly capable of working, but in fact, when you come out with that kind of prison record and having been gone for 25 years, it's not very realistic. And so the plan didn't work, and we had been through so many denials at that point that we really weren't even going to think it was going to happen. Then when we had to then come up with another plan, the parole, of course, people feel that they must, who's going to be paroled to North Carolina, that they must inform the landlord that the person coming out is on parole and has a criminal record. So we ended up doing something almost nobody could do, which was to buy a house, because otherwise we could not find any apartments in the place we were allowed to live that would rent to us. In New York City, this is an issue all the time with NYCHA housing, so this is not only, there. When we finally got out, we went down to Raleigh for parole, and my first realization at how long he had been away and how disconnected from the world was, he looked around and he said, "When did people get so fat?" And this is Raleigh, so trust me. But within 2 weeks of him locking his door within the apartment, and seeing the fear and the upset about how much things cost, I called my dear friend Brian Fisher in New York. Well, he called me actually to see how it was going. And I said, it's going really badly because he doesn't feel like anybody understands what he's experiencing right now. And he said, well, and this is sad when the director of the corrections department has to tell somebody who's been doing this work for 30 years. It was a little embarrassing to me. He said, Liz, don't you think you should have him around other people who've had this experience? I was like, oh, yeah, good plan. And we tried to do that, but it's become more and more difficult because during his incarceration, nobody actually diagnosed traumatic brain injury. And as he's been out, I confused some of the symptoms or signs of being disoriented because he's come out of prison with what turned out to be actually a change in his cognitive abilities and skills. And some of what I thought was anger around just his life situation, that things were so difficult, it was actually medical, and it was the first time we've had to go for neurological testing. One of the things we found out, by the way, is that Medicare actually will not reimburse for any costs if you're on parole, because they consider that to be a cost of corrections. I'm sure I'm sort of almost out of time, but I really want to just kind of give you the bigger picture of how complicated this can be, particularly for families who are in no way prepared. Tina made an important point about it's not just the person coming out, it's the family and what we are expecting and what we're prepared for. Some of this we see at Osborne every day. I actually worked really hard to get a particular person out of prison and then hired him as my assistant after 37 years coming home. And it was really interesting to see the challenge of expecting him to use a cell phone, a fax machine, respond when he had never seen the internet in 37 years. So some of the issues we were dealing with in my family, we see every day. So it's a combination of the challenges of technology, the medical issues that, Jamal was lucky in a sense that he was in a prison in Virginia for the elderly, handicapped, and victim prone. That means it was air conditioned, they had physical therapy, it was a completely safe facility because there were no young people running around being a problem. And he was highly functioning in that environment and saw himself correctly as a leader. The warden came on a day off to say goodbye to him the day he was going to be released and said, I have no idea how I'm going to run this place without you. Inside, he was able to teach cognitive therapy and run the commissary. When he came outside, he was just one more person who believed that everybody looking at him knew he had just been released, believed that he, on one hand, thought he could do things that he have this sort of leadership that he had inside, where when outside he was just one more old man walking down the street and either was kind of feeling like people were looking at him or felt like he should get respect that he wasn't respecting. Little does he know, they don't respect any old people on the street. But again, when you've been away for 25 years, you don't know what to take personally and what not to. So I just put that out as kind of a picture of what challenges people and families, and I will leave it to the rest of the panel to propose some solutions.
Thank you, Liz. I think we all know, having heard from Larry White this morning, having heard from Fareed this morning, having just heard from Liz, and now having the privilege of hearing from Gloria Rubero, who spent 26 years in prison, that the power of personal testimony is unlike any other. And so, Gloria, if you could share your story with us, please.
Okay, aging and doing a lot of time. Both, two things might not always be together. In my case, it is. I went in when I was 30. I came out when I was 56. I was denied parole 5 times. I went to a regular board 3 times and 2 an appeal. I won. In the prison, I earned my position. I had the freedom to do a lot of things that a lot of inmates do not have. I did maintenance. In the 3 prisons, I utilized. And they abused me in the sense that they didn't want to let me go because I saved them a lot of money. Whatever the state asked for, I gave them in return. And yet, when you come down, when you come home, you don't have nothing. At least there is somebody. At least in there you had somebody. But it is like you are thrown from the top of the stairs to the bottom of the stairs. At least I had a college degree I got in prison. People didn't have a lot of them. A lot of them didn't want, because of the age, they didn't want to go to school, they didn't want to get a GED because they figured they were too old. I got both, the GED and my college degree. Inside the facility, I had 2 major strokes and 1 mini strokes for a whole year. And I went to the board with the stroke. They denied me, and I didn't even remember my case, my crime. I couldn't even talk when I went into the parole hearing, and still they denied me. But I had the technique to survive, a survival technique that I was willing to show them that I could walk back again and talk, and I accomplished that. I proved them wrong. And society too. We have changed when we're in prison. I lost my best friend, my companion, my co-defendant. We did time together. Come home, and she died 5 years later. She had cancer, nobody even detected it in there. No area I could move to or go to. When I came out home, I felt the world was so small. There was no space. Technology was so advanced. I felt like I didn't belong. And my friend asked me, what's wrong with you? And I couldn't communicate with them because they couldn't understand what I was going through. I got paranoid, people walking behind me. The telephones, I thought people were crazy. They were talking by themselves. You know, and I was saying like, oh my God. I said, I gotta go back. There's people going crazy out in the street, you know? I didn't know they had phones in their ears, you know, because the technology was so advanced, and in prison, nothing is advanced at all. This is in like 1950s, you know? The cigarettes and everything is less prices, you know, so you don't get to see, or you see in the TV, but it's not like visually having it around you. Walking down the street, I used to always look back, like somebody's like, and people, a person came to me and said, yo, what's wrong with you? You look like you want to kill somebody. And I looked at him like this and I said, no, sorry, sir. It's something that I'm dealing with, that I got to go through. But he didn't understand what I was going through, you know? And then when I came home, it was hard for me to get a job. First, my age. Second, I was gay. 3, I had a criminal background. My co-defendant got a job fast. I always say, oh, because you had long hair. You know, she was more feminine, I was more aggressive, so they just looked at me like, oh, no, you ain't getting nothing. And she got a job first than I did. And then coming home, I had to deal with a whole lot of things that I didn't have to deal inside. Death, people that were dying, my family members that were dying that I actually had to see and go through. Over there, you hear it, but you don't see it. So it's a different way of dealing with things inside than you do outside. My friend died first. 8 months later, my mother died. So now people are dying. So who you have? Nobody. Some people go to a shelter because they don't have nowhere to go. Like she said about the apartment. I had to pay $17,000 because they didn't want me because I had a criminal background. But yet if I gave him $17,000, he let me in. So I had to work, I know, to get that money, to get that apartment for a whole year. Now I'm losing one of my eyesight, you know, and also I'm looking for a job again, you know, but it's harder. It gets harder and harder as the years go by. I wish they had a rehabilitation center or like a work release center for people that are aging, so they could get the proper treatment, and people they have in there that could help them and understand what they're going through and take them to places, because the Metro card, even the machine, I would say that machine is eating my money. You know, I didn't know that. Then you put the thing and the car comes out. You know, things like that was just very strange. And I could understand with her point of view with her husband. You know, people in general, people in life don't have no understanding what we go through. The paranoia, the change, technology, you know, and what we need in here is some place that the older people could go to, not say get established, but at least take them through the things that they have to go through, like if they have to go for medical treatment or looking for a job, somebody to talk to, a doctor, if they have to go to a doctor, because we don't have nothing when we come home. Age is one barrier that we have, that it's on us, on all of us, because we're all going to get older, you know, and but the people in jail has a lot of things going against them, and I think they should have a place where they could go, not to settle in, because I can't say, but to go through and work things out, because nobody understands them, nobody, you know, unless it's somebody like that was in jail too, and did a lot of time. What's the difference between us getting older? The younger ones that come out of jail, they adapt quicker. Their minds are faster. We got slowed down. We take things in an easier pace. Than when you were younger, you adapt to technology and everything fast. Us, we have to, somebody got to teach us and have the patience to teach us. And the difference between women and men in jail are they were more compassionate. Women are more compassionate. Men's are sexual. The thing is more sexual inside than women. But we need a place that we could go to, or people could go to, aging people, that could help them out to reaffirm them in the community and help them out. Because they're no harm to nobody. If they're any harm, they're harm to themselves, not to nobody else. And I've lost a lot when I came out of jail. I had a real big position inside. I had a lot of things that a lot of inmates they didn't have. And when I came out, like I said, it was like they threw me down the stairs. Everything went through the window. So I can understand it's like Shawshank Redemption, that movie is so true. People come out, some of them want to kill themselves, some of them want to go back, some of them can adapt, some people go sleep in the street because they don't have nowhere to go, they're hungry. If you look at their background, they don't have nowhere to go. And I think that they should have a rehabilitation center or a work release center or something to that effect that will help the aging people prosper, you know, because they're not no harm to nobody. They're here to help, and matter of fact, they'll help. And in the penal law and everything like that, they should have trainees, panels where they could listen to these people instead of making decisions on their own on things they don't even know. You know? Because nobody knows anything better than the person that's inside. People read, people lecture, and like I said, I went to school, and I used to have a lot of arguments with my professors because I didn't believe in a lot of things that they said in books, but I'm just an argumentative person on things that I don't believe in, because people, who writes them? People. Experiences, a lot of them don't have experience. They even haven't gone through nothing like that. They haven't even they haven't had the challenge. All they do is listen, hear, and make a decision. Have trainings, have panels for each community and places of people that have gone through this, so you know what you're working with, so people could help each other. It's not what they've done, who's they becoming, and what type of person they are. They're not bad persons. A lot of them were in there for drugs. They were using drugs. They come out, they're drug-free. And some of them just go back to drugs because there's nothing else to do, because nobody wants to help them. Nobody. It's a challenge. To get Medicaid is a challenge. To go SSI is a challenge. You know, nobody wants to give you a hand. You know, and a rightful person could make a mistake. You all should give everybody a chance, a second chance. Everybody in this world should have a second chance, because you never know what might happen today or tomorrow. You know, that's all I gotta say.
Thank you, Gloria. And, excuse me. As you so eloquently outlined all of the challenges that you faced, you know, it's basically a litany of all of the needs that people returning from prisons need to have. I'd like to introduce, we're very honored to have Lilliam Barrios-Paoli, who is the Deputy Mayor for Health and Human Services. And in that capacity, the Department of Aging comes under that department. And so I'd like to give the Deputy Mayor an opportunity to talk about what kind of supportive services and how can elected officials and other policymakers create a more supportive and welcoming environment.
Difficult to come after you.
Yes.
You know, government is a really, as you know, not a very user-friendly entity. Mike.
No.
Better? No.
Wait.
Technology is challenging, yes. Technology is challenging. So essentially government is constructed, the services part of government is constructed in a way that, as I like to tell my staff, we give people the services we have, which is not necessarily the services that they need, but you get what we have. So, and in the last 20 years or so in New York City, we've had a very, it's been more difficult than in the prior 20 years. We've had a very anti-poor people kinds of policies, punitive in most services, difficult to access. If you look down at every agency that reports that report to me now, it looks like we've spent a lot of time thinking how to not deliver services to people, or how to make it difficult for you to access service. In the new administration, the big challenge we have is how do we change those policies? How do we make it more user-friendly? I must say that I was Commissioner of Aging the first time that a group came to talk to me about this problem, and I had never, ever given it 1 second of thought. This is not something that entered my sphere of thinking or influencing. And it was really daunting when I started thinking of it. And as I've been listening to you and I've been reading the material, it seems to me that although you need the services from a lot of the agencies that government has out there that I supervise, it would be very user unfriendly for you to try to negotiate one service at a time and go to each agency and try to get the things that you should be getting. So I think we have to think in terms of what kind of program do we create so that you have one place to go and receive whatever it is that you need, and that is user-friendly, and it helps you navigate what you have to navigate. We have to sort of put our thinking caps and think of that, because it brings a lot of the systems together. You know, my sense is that we would have to make it, you know, and we have to do a lot of thinking in terms of that. I mean, I certainly volunteered to do that thinking and to work with you towards creating it. I think you're right. I think that the other very not helpful thing we do is that we tend to create services without talking to the people who are receiving the services. So we sort of created an abstract and hope that it really works. So, you know, we need to include clients, you know, people coming out of prison so that we can know what they really need and want. You know, aging is a difficult thing to begin with. I can vouch for that. So that is really, you know, so you begin from that. Coming out of any system that is an institution is difficult. We see it with children coming out of foster care. We see it with, you know, people who've been hospitalized for long periods of time. The reentry is very difficult. So when you put together the reentry process with aging, with all of these things, it must be totally daunting to come back. Plus the stigma that the rest of us attach to people coming out. So I think, you know, we have to sort of figure out how do we make this reentry easier? How do we make it possible to reattach to society without going through, you know, the difficulties that you certainly went through? I would love very much to at the end of, you know, whatever time we have in government, but the next 4 years, have some model program that we can point to and say, look, we did something better. So hopefully we can do that, and hopefully it doesn't take us the 4 years, obviously, but we can make it on the shorter track. But I am committed to doing so, and hopefully we can make it happen.
And what is so encouraging about that is that in looking at Tina's presentation, it speaks to an holistic approach to support services, and instead of having it scattered all over the place. One of the most major impediments to successfully returning are those that have to do with education, with employment, and the box. And we have Sandra Pullman, who works for the New York State Attorney General's Office in the Civil Rights Division, who's going to talk about some of those barriers and the statutes that are working to eliminate them.
Thanks, Annette. I think Gloria put it really well, talking about all the different discriminatory reasons someone could have to deny you a job. Sexual orientation, gender, could be race, could be nationality. I don't need to tell anyone here how much of an impediment having a criminal record can be to getting a job. You might be interested to know that some studies have found that the formerly incarcerated are the least likely group to be hired. In some polls that they've taken of employers, people say that they are less likely to hire someone with a criminal record than they are someone with a poor employment history who has a record of poor job performance, which is not very intuitive. Obviously, it's a big issue it's a big civil rights issue for New Yorkers. In New York State, each year, about 27,000 individuals are released from prisons and 100,000 from jails. As we all know, the criminal justice system has incredible racial disparities, so these burdens are falling primarily on communities of color. Folks are 2 to 3 times more likely to be arrested if they're non-white. And there are advocates who have taken the approach of challenging employment practices that discriminate on the basis of criminal history by using federal civil rights law that prohibit race discrimination. The good news that I have for you in the face of all of these depressing statistics is that New York State has a very comprehensive anti-discrimination law that applies to all applicants, regardless of race, who have a criminal history, and essentially requires that instead of operating based on stereotypes, biases, animus, or any kind of discrimination, that employers actually consider whether someone's criminal conviction has any bearing on the job. And so the statute is designed so that someone is not supposed to be disqualified unless there's the way it's written, there's a direct relationship between one or more of the criminal offenses and a specific job sought, or the person's criminal conviction suggests that they pose a public safety threat or a threat to the employer's property. There are a number of factors that employers have to consider before they disqualify someone based on a criminal conviction, including, which my favorite part, which is that the state's public policy is to encourage reentry, is to encourage the licensure and employment of persons previously convicted. And as has been discussed, having a job is one of the most important elements to rehabilitating and to reducing recidivism. Other items that employers have to consider are the specific duties and responsibilities of the job sought, whether they have any bearing on the conviction, how long it's been since someone has been out, the age of the person at the time that they committed the offense. Excuse me, it's not the time someone's been out, it's the time that has passed since the offense occurred. Seriousness of the offense, any evidence of rehabilitation and good conduct, and so this includes formal documents like a certificate of relief from disabilities, but also reference letters from former employers, from pastors, from community members. And finally, the employer is allowed to consider legitimate public safety concerns. So this applies to all government positions and applies to any employer who employs more than 10 people in New York. Our office enforces these laws. I know that we're probably not the go-to place for many people who have been incarcerated. I don't think your first inclination is to turn to the state for help. But the affirmative wing of the Attorney General's office really does prosecute civil rights violations, and I personally work on these issues. I have a lot of cards. And I can tell you that we've secured settlement agreements with employers who have discriminated on the basis of criminal history, with temp agencies who have discriminated for employers. We recently announced agreements with several consumer reporting agencies, the ones who provide the criminal background report, because they had a practice of doing the dirty work for an employer. An employer would give a matrix or a set of rules. For example, I don't want anyone with a felony conviction in the last 10 years. And they'd give that, and they'd give the applicant's information to the consumer reporting agency, and the agency would then run the background check and automatically disqualify anyone who didn't meet the employer's requirements. They would automatically send out rejection letters without letting the employer go through this legally mandated individualized evaluation. We've even worked with municipalities upstate. I don't know if this has crossed anyone's desk, but there was in Oswego, the town council or city council decided that they had to issue a law that they would not provide licenses to, and in fact they would revoke anyone's license to anyone who had a felony conviction in the last 10 years. And it was incredibly overbroad. It completely violated state law, and we worked with the city to amend that law. Unfortunately, there are a lot, I think, of other local ordinances, almost too many for us to take on, but the Attorney General's office is really committed to providing opportunities for ex-offenders and not allowing people to, not depriving people of their right to work based on a criminal conviction that has no bearing on the job they're looking for. The other somewhat positive news I can bring is that there are municipalities who are just banning the box entirely. Buffalo is the only area in New York that has done it so far, although there are 55 jurisdictions throughout the country that have enacted a ban the box law. What this means is that employers cannot, on an initial application, ask someone to disclose whether they have a felony conviction. They are entirely permitted to ask about criminal background at an application stage, but at that point, the hope is that an individual will have the ability to explain what the conviction was, how they've dealt with it, how they've rehabilitated, any mitigating evidence that they have and evidence of good conduct. So I'm hopeful that more areas in New York will go in that direction, and in the meantime, we'll continue to enforce state law.
Thank you, Sandra. Now, I keep thinking about what Tina said about this balance between autonomy and support. And in thinking about, Sandra, what you've just described and the barriers to employment, those are under the circumstances for even a young person returning from prison. And none of us have to have been incarcerated after a certain age to realize that we are facing age discrimination in many levels. And so under this framework of autonomy and support, what is your advice as to how people can advocate for themselves while also, knowing that there are, offices like yours that will, support the statutes that are supposed to combat, the impeding of work and education. But how does how does a person who's already facing age discrimination and then is compounded by coming on with a criminal record, that's like a double whammy? Any advice for people?
I'll always give a pitch for our office because we do handle age discrimination, sexual orientation discrimination, race discrimination, gender discrimination. And so our office, also the EEOC, it has issued guidelines about why criminal history discrimination is race discrimination. They have intake forms that include a number of boxes that you can check. I think that as an advocate, that is probably the best approach. You often don't know the reason that you've been denied a job, which makes bringing discrimination complaints somewhat difficult. But I think it makes sense to identify all the factors you think there might be. In general, my best advice in terms of advocating for oneself just in the application process is to, A, disclose a conviction, because although this state law is very comprehensive, an employer can get around it if someone wasn't truthful in the first place. And people don't disclose their convictions on a regular basis because they're right that it may disqualify them, whether lawfully or unlawfully. However, if they don't, they sort of give the employer an out, that they can say, well, we're not hiring you because you lied. So I think the best advice I have is to disclose, but also provide as much information as possible. Employers are supposed to consider all of these factors. They often don't, but make them.
One of the themes that's become clear, and it was also touched upon this morning, is that community support for returning loved ones is key, and it's integral to any successful reintegration. But since many people, as we know from prisoners of the census, we know from the $1 Million Blocks, come from communities that are already under-resourced and overtaxed and have a multitude of other issues, what steps can be taken to fortify those communities? I know that discussion has earlier ensued about justice. There's a whole issue of justice, of reinvesting monies saved through the closings of prisons. That's one way. But I'd be interested to hear from other advocates, how do you fortify those communities so that they are better able to receive returning loved ones? What for Gloria and Liz in particular, what specifically would have been more helpful? What would have made the transition more manageable for either or both of you?
I think a place to go that people understand you and help you go along. Make believe they open up a center now, or one of these buildings that she's talking about. Maybe I work in that building. Somebody coming out of jail, I could tag along and show them the ropes, show them how to do things. And if he got paranoid or whatever, I knew how to deal with that person. You know, psychologically, mentally, whatever, I could deal with the person, and he would understand him, have confidence in me to lead him the right way. You know, I have more understanding. Maybe showed him the ropes for a job. You know, because like me, I had just a little more problem. Like I said, I'm aggressive, so it was harder for me to get a job and things like that. They look for more feminine girls or ladies or women, whatever look. And my type of work that I learned inside, because I didn't have no certificate or degree in the training that I had been useful inside, I couldn't do it outside.
I would say, in addition, that the medical community would need to be more educated about the impact of incarceration and what kinds of medical things to look at. It goes both ways. I know as a parent years ago, when I told pediatricians that my kid's father was in prison, their only knowing what to do was give them more TB tests. And when Jomo came home, they almost killed him doing an MRI because they didn't notice that he had bullets that would be affected with an MRI. And when they realized what they were just like afraid of him, because who would be there with bullets in your back? So he didn't really want to go back very much and feeling like the kind of questions that doctors ask and how they ask them come across as quite judgmental when people are coming out, and then you're asked for your medical records, and then you have 485 pages medical records if you've been in for 25 years and have had medical challenges, and the community on the outside may not know how to do it. Those things are changing, but it's those kinds of things in the community. The other thing is that you would like people to be able to go to senior centers, for instance, and you're going to have people, some of the issues people face when they're older are just like anybody else who's facing issues around aging, but then there's some issues that are different that both the community needs to understand and families do. I get questions all the time from family members who think that the person coming home is crazy because he's putting his clothes under the bed. And I have to explain, no, that's how you iron clothes in prison. When you don't have an iron, you keep them pressed under your bed. And so there's this confusion when people are looking for the combination, like, how does prison affect people? So we have to provide something for families so that they're prepared over this long time, particularly families that are sticking with people over 10, 15, 20, 25 years. Those relationships are created in visiting rooms, and the power and control issues and all the other things that happen in a relationship that goes for a long time in a prison visiting room changes dramatically when someone comes home, and families are not necessarily prepared for that. We had one guy who was thought his wife thought he was going back to prison because he wanted the Con Ed bill in his name, and thought the only reason she wasn't willing to change it was because she didn't have confidence that he was going to stay out. So having those kinds of counseling and supportive services by people who actually do, kind of what Gloria is saying, it has to be somebody that understands what you've been through on the side of the person released, but also for the families, somebody who understands what that role was like and what it means to wait for somebody, especially if you expected them to come home when they were young and able, and they end up coming home when they're much older. You've built a dream life. Their children think that they're coming home years they thought Daddy's going to come home and take me to the zoo. And now Dad comes home and they have to take him to the doctor. And those roles shift, and nobody is really prepared to help people understand that. So people that deal with aging people need to understand that better. And then people who work in our system need to understand geriatrics and aging better, because we don't.
Sure. I want to make a comment. It seems as if for many people that I've worked with or spoken to after community reintegration, especially those that are age 50 and served older 20 or more year prison sentences, is that if the process of reintegration begins prior to coming out, that is the most helpful process. And many of the people who have been in for a long time, as Laura and Fareed and others and Larry brought out, actually can make a contribution to community. So if we build individual capacity, starting before they come out, we actually have a group of people that are really yearning to help and be of service to others. And that's what we wanted as a society or a community to when people went to prison, that they learned empathy and seek restoration and make amends. And many of them are willing to do so. And I have story after story, including one man that he got trained to be a forensic peer specialist, and he did that while in prison. When he came out, now he's working in a GLBT counseling center, working with helping other individuals build capacity, which in turn builds family capacity, which in turn build community capacity. They really get that connection between helping yourself ends up helping others. So that's a source that would address helping prepare for release, as well as also putting position in the people in the position to realize their potential.
Something to that effect. In the system, when you have a lot of times, I know for the women, instead of them sending them down to a minimum security jail where they could go outside, you know, and get used to a little bit of doing community work, they don't. Because there was only 2 of us that was in a minimum security jail. And they let one out, and I stood in. Because they don't accept, it was very rare if they accept a person that had long time to be in a minimum security jail, which they think they're going to escape. And they're not. After 26 years? I don't think so. You know, but that's something else that they should look at, because from being inside, to help them out a little bit.
Well, you know what I find so interesting about this is that there seem to be, at times, 2 parallel narratives that are going on. And I think we as advocates have to begin to think about how they can both exist in our advocacy at the same time and complement each other. The first one is that, you know, the aging in prison, the prison experience, you know, has a more deleterious effect on a person's health when they come out. And so many people are sick, and many people are infirm, and many people are in need of medical care. The other narrative, the parallel narrative, of course, is that people are coming out having taken advantage of education and growth and redemption and all of those other things that we say prison is supposed to provide opportunities for, and that people are in fact hale and ready and willing and capable to make a valuable contribution to society. And so I think, you know, not unlike other issues that we face around, we talked about LWOP as opposed to the death penalty and other kinds of things that seem to be in conflict with each other, we have to figure out a way to be able to have those narratives complement each other and have our policies reflect the fact that both of those things can exist, that services to take care and support families as well as people returning from prison who have health problems can also be the same people who are trained and able to make valuable contributions to society. And so we have to stop thinking in an either-or situation. There's something that I've just been going over my head and going through my head. A lot of things go over my head as well. But in this case, it went right through. And that is this. As we begin to talk more about reentry, and particularly when it has been framed in fiscal terms, and, you know, someone rightly pointed out that we'll take our advocates, you know, where we can get them, that will help move the needle, bend that arc of justice a little closer to where we want it to be. My concern is, and I'd really be interested in hearing others' take on it, is that I am concerned that when we are framing it as a fiscal issue, and we haven't entrenched issues of morality and humanity and human rights into it, that there's a danger that reentry can become commodified. You know, prisons have become commodified. You know, the Corrections Corporation of America, we've all heard, wants a guarantee of 90% occupancy in order to even sign a contract with 39 states in this country. And so where there's a profit motive, there is, of course, the motive to keep things the way they are and to keep pushing people through the system. And so one of the kind of things that I'm hoping that we can kind of really think about, and clearly not come to some conclusion here today, but I'm interested to hear what other people feel about this, is that as we, you know, really begin to talk about creating mechanisms and creating supportive arrangements for people coming out of prison, that people do not remain in a permanent state of reentry, and that there is a pathway to complete restoration of civic, human, social, and whatever kind of life, you know, we are all entitled to have. And so I was just, you know, I'm just really interested to hear other people's thoughts about that, or if anyone has thought about that at all. Whether I'm just being my usual, you know, paranoid self. I don't know.
No, it's happened in other systems. Essentially, when the idea of, you know, it's happened with mental health. You know, when we deinstitutionalized the mentally ill, we never reinvested in community and just let it happen, and it was privatized. It's happened in, you know, in any number of services. I think anytime you create a new service, there are people who emerge to provide that service, and you have to be very careful. How do you deal with that? I mean, do you make it time limited? Is it appropriate for the person receiving the service? You know, I have a very long career both in government and not-for-profit, and I don't like for-profits to be in the service delivery system. And every place I've been, you know, it's not legal to prevent them from coming in. I've tried and I've been sued, so I can tell you from personal experience. But the reality is that once you introduce the profit motive, then you sort of, the social outcomes change. Yes. There's a new tendency now to create interest bonds that have a goal of saving money, and with that, the people who invest in the money will get a return. Social impact bonds. And I find that mildly scary, because you have people investing, expecting a monetary return in services. And, you know, I suppose like anything in life, if you manage it well, it's fine. Yes. But it's a very scary thought. I mean, and I know Liz knows about this well. But I find it, you know, it could be very well used. I hope it's never abused. And I think that that's the caveat that we all have. It is a way of capitalizing services and being able to have a new, you know, the problem with services is government doesn't pay for the full cost. You have to fundraise from the private sector, and they only like to fund you for 3 years. So you're always chasing your tail. And so creating a revenue stream is very tempting. The question is, you have to be very careful.
Well, in terms of commodifying it, and I think it is true we have the country's first social impact bond, but it's also true that your friend, the deputy mayor for housing and economic development, is the person who invested. Okay, I'm just saying.
I know. And
so,
and everybody that's doing it now, it's pure. It's just that if it.
No, I don't disagree. But the point of the commodification that's actually more something to watch in terms of permanent reentry and is Medicaid redesign, because as we are going forward, they anticipate that about 30% of the Medicaid expansion will be people with criminal justice histories. We are a special population, and so you talk about, right now we worry about the private prisons, but wait till the private healthcare companies get involved in health homes and managed care, and you're going to see a commodification of reentry in ways that social impact bonds could never compete with.
That's a very good point. Well, we have about 10 minutes left in this session for Q&A. I'd like to thank the panelists for their wonderful observations and presentations. Thank you very much. And I'd like to open the floor for questions.
Oh, hi, good afternoon. I'm very emotional because this part of the day, I have a loved one that has been incarcerated for 31 years. And so you're right about the fact that I've been there from day one. So now we're both 30 years older. Our lives have changed a lot. We're hoping that through the rap road, perhaps he could come out because he still has a lot of time left. But in each one of you ladies touching on each facet of what you're talking about, it's so, you know, we could be unstable or crazy with just being out here, so never mind what's going on there. And so, as you say, going to see my brother for 31 years, you know, it's the family facet. We've lost, while he was incarcerated, we've lost my parents. I've lost brothers and sisters. His kids were 2, and now they're 32. He has quite a lot of children. And it's just, you know, I just feel like so jumbled up now because you're touching on everything that we're going to have to, God, even while he's there, we have to worry about his mental state, his mental health. We have to worry about what we say, how we say it, even the little things that are so, they seem crazy to us, but it's his way of thinking. So thinking positively, we wonder, well, when he comes home, I've been in the same home for 46 years. Well, that neighborhood has changed dramatically. So I start talking to him and I give him streets and then I'll say something and he's like, but what? And if he comes out tomorrow, he would be like shocked. He's shocked to hell. And you know, and even he'll yell at his kids about the phones and or the electronics, and they're like, well, get with it, get with it, old man, or whatever. But it's just, even from the part of how difficult they make it. I have a family member that works at DMV, and she says she sees them every day come in, and you need to get ID to get going, but how do you get going to get ID? So it's just...
Is there a question that maybe somebody on the panel could help you with?
No, what I just want, this is just a sidebar. I took a little bit from everybody, and I just want to say I'm glad that I'm part. At one time, I thought I was by myself, and now that I couldn't do it by myself, even though I've been there for a long time, and I'm limited as well because, again, a lot of things happen. I just feel very honored and I just feel very infused, the fact that hearing from all these other people, whether you have went through it yourself and or the family, it just gives a lot of hope. Because right now there are times that he doesn't feel like there's any hope. And so I just want to say that I so feel what every one of you has said. And I have to thank you because, again, it gives me more hope. When I go see him, I could say, you know what, we're working on it. I told Fareed, a little while ago, I've spoken to Laura. I'm like, I can't do much by myself, but knowing that each one of you had hit a facet of, so at least I'm smart enough to understand, how they go, and it's just a matter of putting them in order. And I wanted to share that to let you know from a family member that has been going through this for 31 years that you can't ever stop, but it's a lot. So
anyone want to speak to that? Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Thank you.
You know, don't give up
Right.
on him.
Oh, no, well,
And
I'm
have
gonna do
faith.
that.
Tell him to have faith. He has. Believe me. Inside you have a lot of faith. And
Well-
you have determination inside because you're determined to go home. And even though you make your dreams of how it's going to be out there, which when you come out is nothing like you dream about, but you have that oomph, that faith, that hope that you're going to be out there one day. You know?
Well, again, you ladies have certainly, everyone has given me a lot to wish and hope for, so thank you.
Yeah, and if you just let him know that there's a lot of people out here who care about him and other people in a similar situation, I think he might.
I've told him that, but after 31 years, you know, it's kind of like, you know, there are times where we go up there and it's like you said, you know, you have to have, if you have transportation or you don't have transportation, and whether, you know, you have the time or you have the energy and you have, so there are a lot of times that I don't know how I know how I feel having to go up there, but how he feels being, so it's just a work in progress. So we try to give him, you know, we're okay while he's there, and then you leave him and it's like, okay, so again, I've been with him all this time, and I'm just hoping that he'll come out before he loses anybody else. So, and if I need anything, I know where to go. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I saw this gentleman.
I'd like to thank the panel. One of the things that was just barely touched on, but I think is important, and Annette touched on it, and so did Sandra, that services alone are not enough. There are tremendous legal barriers to reentry that need to be eliminated. If you go to prison and you train to be a barber, you come out and you can't get a barber's license because you're an ex-offender. You can't get food stamps. You can't get subsidized housing. I'm working with National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. We're coming out next month with our Restoration of Rights project. We're looking to do a pilot program in New York State to be a model for the rest of the country. We need to remove those barriers, because if you give people services and they bang their heads against these barriers, then you have a problem. So I think that's just something everyone needs to be aware of.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, panelists. I've been holding this microphone. My name is Victor. I'm part of the RAP campaign and coalition organizer. And my question is directed at Lillian. And I'd like to know, I've heard all of this information being given. And as a person being formerly incarcerated, I know how difficult it is when a person comes home. I've been home 16 years now. However, now we're addressing additional information that relates to the elders that are coming home. We all know it's hard enough for a person to get an apartment out here without being formally incarcerated, having to go through a background check, having to go through a credit check. People that are elderly and aging and coming out of prison, they got no background, they got no credit. What is and what can be done with regards to creating funding for and housing for this population of people that will eventually be coming out, hopefully very soon, in the campaign that we're doing? Everybody's saying that there's no money, but what is going to be done with regards to creating housing and funding for this population?
Yeah, you know, housing is a real serious problem for every population in the city of New York. I mean, there's 52,400 people sleeping in shelters last night. 10,200 are families, and and 20,000 of them are children. So it's really, housing is at a premium. Mayor has made a commitment of 200,000 affordable housing units, during his administration. One of the things that we've been discussing is, can we do set aside for particular populations that are, it's particularly difficult for them to access housing. I think this is a population that certainly should be singled out, particularly the aging population. The only source of funding for aging housing was the 202 HUD funding. That has gone away. The federal government has disinvested in housing in general, but particularly in aging housing. So the city has to take the initiative in creating those units. I think we're looking at all of the possibilities for housing. If you've been following the papers, my name has been branded around for battling the Cuomo administration for rental assistance, which I think we need. We need as many tools as we can get, but rental assistance is one of them. Most people that work, even if you work full-time, if you're making minimum wage or just slightly above minimum wage, you cannot afford to rent an apartment in the city. Not forget Manhattan, in any part of the city. So that's a real serious challenge, and we have to figure out how do we create a rental subsidy. We have to, NYCHA has to function better. They have too many apartments that are not being utilized because they can't get to repair them fast enough. Section 8 has disappeared, so that's one tool we don't have. In the last few years, HPD used to do a set-aside of 10% for homeless people. Now they don't, so I'm trying to get them to do that again. So we're trying to look and see where can we create housing, how can we create housing. And we'll try very hard. I understand, I heard what Liz said and what Gloria said, that when you're coming out of prison, it must be 10 times more difficult for you than somebody who's already in the community. And 50% of the single people in the shelters are people coming out of prison. So, clearly that tells you how difficult and tough it is. So we're going to try to address it as much as we can. We're going to try to be creative in terms of housing. I think we have a lot of housing rules that are ridiculous. It is illegal in the city of New York to have more than 3 unrelated adults live together. Now, of course, every Columbia student does it. It's only illegal if you're poor. Or if they catch you. So, so those are ridiculous things that we have to sort of bring up to reality. And be more flexible in our zoning and be more flexible in many things. Around Queens, places that used to be 2-family homes, there are 4 or 5 families living in. We need to legalize those things, make them safe, but legalize them. Life is different. So there are a lot of things we can do that may just create a little better situation in the housing. New York City has a 1% vacancy rate, which is the same as saying nothing. So it's very tough. It's very tough. So.
Thank you for answering that, and it was a wealth of information, and I'm just hoping that not only do we just hear these things, that we begin to see these things start to take place and start to actually have some activity. Conversation is one thing, action is another. I like to see things done as opposed to talking about being done. So I thank you for your time and thank you for the information, and I'm hoping we'll get a chance to work together because I like to see this happen.
That's a wonderful note on which to end this session. Regrettably, we've run out of time. Once again, please join me in thanking our panelists.